The rain hit the pavement with a relentless rhythm, the kind that made everything feel a little heavier, a little more threatening. Lucas Voss stood at the corner of 6th and Chestnut, staring out across the neon-lit streets of the city. He wasn't looking at anything in particular, just the pulse of the city that seemed to hum with some kind of malevolent energy. Somewhere out there, in the murk and fog, was a hunter. Or, more likely, a dozen of them. The text had come earlier that evening, like a cold slap in the face. "We know who you are, Lucas." "Time's up." A dull ache thrummed behind his eyes as he squinted up at the crisscross of electrical cables above. His fingers twitched at his sides, and for a second, he could feel the familiar hum of electricity in his veins. He could summon it, control it, but it was a chaotic power. The moment he let it loose, things would spiral out of control, like an electrical storm ripping through the city grid. Lucas took a deep breath and pocketed his phone. The message was nothing new. The Order had been hunting him for months, ever since they'd first discovered his abilities. But tonight, something felt different. The tension in the air crackled literally. It was only a matter of time before they found him, but he wasn't going down without a fight. Just then, a figure stepped out of the shadows, a sharp silhouette under the flickering streetlight. The man was tall, dressed in a suit that looked too polished for this part of town, even in the rain. His face was hidden beneath the brim of a fedora, but the cool, calculating aura was unmistakable. "Lucas Voss," the man said, his voice smooth but carrying a cold edge. "I've been looking for you." Lucas didn't move. He didn't even flinch. Instead, he smiled just a little. "If you're from the Order, you're going to be disappointed." The man stepped closer, the sound of his polished shoes tapping the wet pavement. "We don't have time for games, Voss. You're coming with me." Lucas didn't reply at first. He didn't need to. He could feel it now, how the air hummed around them. This wasn't a negotiation. The hunter had come for him, but Lucas had a secret weapon of his own. Without warning, Lucas snapped his fingers, sending a jolt of electricity through the streetlight above. The bulb flickered and exploded in a burst of light, blinding the man for a split second. In that brief moment, Lucas was already in motion, using the surge of power to send a bolt of energy hurtling toward the hunter. The man was quick, too quick. He dodged, twisting to the side with almost unnatural precision. Lucas cursed under his breath. The man's reflexes were more than human. But that didn't matter. Lucas wasn't planning to fight him head-on. He had another plan. The city around them was alive with power that Lucas could tap into. He reached out with his mind, pulling on the nearby power lines, manipulating the flow of energy. The streetlights blinked, flickered, and then went dark. The city grid had been temporarily disabled, and the world around them plunged into shadows. For a moment, everything was still. Then, the hunt began. The hunter didn't waste time. He knew this city like the back of his hand. But Lucas knew it better. With a flick of his wrist, Lucas sent an electrical pulse down the side of a nearby building, sending sparks showering across the alley. As he moved, the city became his weapon. Every electrical current, every wire, every outlet at his disposal. His steps were quick, deliberate, the kind of smooth movements that betrayed his deep understanding of his own power. Every corner, every darkened alley, every flickering light was an opportunity to set another trap. The man followed, but Lucas could feel the tension in the air. His heart raced as the adrenaline kicked in. He could sense the hunter drawing closer, just behind him, but Lucas had something the man didn't. He had the city. A sudden burst of power came from above as Lucas manipulated the electrical grid to create a temporary blackout in a nearby block, causing a series of sparks to fly from the power poles. He ducked into the shadows as the man cursed and adjusted his trajectory, trying to stay on his trail. Lucas smirked, his body already preparing for the next move. Just as the hunter rounded the corner, Lucas unleashed another burst of energy, sending a surge through the ground. The man stumbled back, momentarily disoriented, but Lucas wasn't waiting around. He sprinted down a narrow alley, calculating his next steps as his mind raced. Then, a familiar voice cut through the darkness. "You know," the woman said, her tone light, even playful. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." Lucas stopped, heart hammering in his chest. He recognized the voice immediately. Zara. She stepped out of the shadows, her hair wet from the rain, eyes gleaming in the dim light. Unlike the hunter, Zara wasn't dressed in black. She wore a leather jacket and boots, a small, confident smile on her lips. Zara wasn't like the others. She was a wind elemental. She controlled the air, the currents, the breezes. She was quick, like a ghost, able to move through spaces and slip through cracks in the world itself. They'd crossed paths once before, but that had been months ago. He hadn't expected to see her here, not now, not like this. "You're with him," Lucas said, his voice low. His heart dropped in his chest. Betrayal had always been a risk. But now? Now it felt like a knife twisting in his side. "I'm not here to fight you, Lucas," Zara said, her smile fading slightly. "But you're not exactly making this easy either. You're the target, not me." Lucas narrowed his eyes. "What does that mean?" "The Order, they're after your power, Lucas. They want to harness it, to control it. I've been working with them, trying to get close. But you've been too good at hiding." The confession hit like a punch to the gut. Lucas clenched his fists, the electric hum inside him rising again. Zara seemed to sense the shift in his energy. "Don't. I'm not your enemy. I'm trying to help you." But Lucas didn't trust her, not anymore. Before he could react, the hunter emerged from the shadows, his movements fluid, precise. Zara looked at him, then back at Lucas, her eyes flickering with something unreadable. "We don't have time for this," the hunter said, stepping forward with purpose. Lucas was done talking. His powers surged out of him in a violent burst, sending sparks flying into the wet street. "You're wrong," Lucas said, voice cold. "The real hunt is just beginning." The moment the hunter lunged toward Lucas, everything seemed to slow down. The air hummed with the promise of chaos as Lucas's hand shot out, sending a burst of energy rippling through the alleyway. Sparks crackled from the tips of his fingers, arcing through the wet air, and the hunter flinched back, his eyes narrowing. But it wasn't fast enough. The blast hit him square in the chest, sending him stumbling into a pile of discarded crates. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then the hunter growled, rising to his feet with a fluid, almost unnatural grace. His movements were too controlled, too precise to be human. His eyes, cold and unwavering, met Lucas's. "I don't have time for this," the hunter said, his voice tight with annoyance. He reached into his coat, pulling out a small device that looked like a metallic rod. He twisted it, and suddenly, a low hum filled the air, the kind of hum that vibrated deep in Lucas's bones. Before Lucas could react, the hunter slammed the rod into the ground. There was a pulse, and the air around them shifted, gravity warped, bending unnaturally. Lucas felt his body grow heavier, like he was sinking into the earth itself. "Nice trick," Lucas said through gritted teeth, fighting the pull of the gravity that threatened to drag him down. "But not good enough." The hunter smirked, clearly enjoying the struggle. "You don't realize just how much power you're playing with, do you? You're not the only one with abilities, Voss. I can make this easier for you." The pull of gravity intensified. Lucas's knees buckled, and he slammed into the concrete. His vision blurred as the weight pressed down on him, but he could still feel the electricity running through him, still sensed the city's power just beneath the surface. He couldn't let it consume him. Not now that he fought against the pressure, pushing himself back onto his feet with a grunt. Sweat dripped down his face, but his eyes burned with determination. "You think this is the end?" Lucas spat, a grin tugging at the corner of his lips. "You have no idea what I'm capable of." With a guttural shout, Lucas reached deep into the power grid, into the very pulse of the city. He could feel the electricity like a living thing, thrumming beneath the asphalt, feeding into every streetlight, every outlet, every flickering display in the area. He closed his eyes and pulled. He pulled until the world around him felt like it was vibrating. The effect was immediate. With a crack, the streetlights above them exploded into a cascade of sparks, and the force of the surge broke the gravity field the hunter had created. For a moment, everything seemed to snap back into place, and Lucas's body was weightless. He shot upward, propelled by the surge of power. His feet hit the ground with a force that sent a shockwave through the alley, knocking the hunter off his feet, but Lucas didn't stop. He was already moving in a blur of motion. He slammed his fist into the side of the hunter's head, sending him crashing into the nearest wall. The hunter groaned, his face a mask of shock and fury. He wasn't expecting this, and Lucas could tell he was beginning to doubt whether he'd ever make it out of this encounter alive. "Not bad, kid," the hunter spat, wiping blood from his lip. "But you're not done yet." Before Lucas could make a move, Zara was there. She darted between them, her eyes locked on the hunter. The wind around her whipped violently, a whirlwind of force that sent debris flying into the air. "Step aside," she said, her voice sharp, like steel wrapped in silk. "He's mine." The hunter looked at her with a glimmer of recognition. "Zara," he growled, his voice low. "I should have known you'd be involved in this. You always were the traitor." Zara didn't flinch. "You don't know anything about me." Without another word, she raised her hands, and the wind shifted again. A violent gust whipped through the alley, knocking Lucas off balance. But it wasn't just wind that Zara controlled, it was the very air around them, the atmosphere itself. With a flick of her wrist, she sent a gust of razor-sharp air at the hunter. He barely managed to dodge, but the wind cut through the fabric of his coat, leaving a long gash in the material. "You're playing with fire," the hunter said, his voice strained as he regained his footing. Zara's lips curled into a tight smile. "And you're about to get burned." As she summoned more wind to propel herself forward, Lucas hesitated. There was something off about this whole situation. Zara's involvement felt too convenient. Too perfect. He couldn't shake the feeling that something else was going on here, something he wasn't seeing. His instinct screamed at him, but before he could act, the hunter made his move. The man slammed his gravity-warping rod into the ground again. This time, there was no subtlety. He aimed directly at Zara. The ground beneath her feet cracked as the force of the gravity rippled outward, catching her off guard. She collapsed to her knees, gasping for air, her wind abilities dissipating as the pressure built. Lucas watched as Zara struggled beneath the weight of the gravity. For a second, the anger and betrayal flooded his chest. He should have known better. She was playing both sides. She had been working with the Order this whole time. Without thinking, Lucas lashed out. He reached for the electricity, gathering a ball of energy between his palms. He didn't care about the consequences anymore. He didn't care about the collateral damage or the risk to himself. The only thing that mattered was stopping the hunter, stopping the damn Order from taking everything he held dear. Lucas threw the ball of energy with everything he had. It shot through the air, a bolt of blinding light that hit the hunter square in the chest. The impact sent him flying back, his rod clattering to the ground with a sharp metallic clink. For a brief moment, Lucas felt the rush of victory. But that didn't last long. The hunter wasn't done. The man pushed himself up, his body crackling with a faint, dark energy. Lucas could see it now, a faint glow beneath his skin, like the hunter was absorbing the very electricity around him, feeding off it. "You're making this too difficult," the hunter muttered, as his body began to glow brighter. "I don't need to kill you, Voss. I just need to neutralize you." He raised his hand, and Lucas felt the pressure building. The gravity around him intensified once again, but this time, it wasn't just pulling down, it was twisting, like the air itself was being warped into a suffocating coil. His legs buckled, and his vision blurred. He could feel the power draining from him, but this time, it wasn't just the hunt at stake. It was something deeper. His survival instinct kicked in. The electric hum inside him roared to life once again, stronger than it had ever been before. "Enough," Lucas growled, summoning all the power he could muster. He couldn't afford to hold back. With a final, explosive burst of energy, Lucas unleashed the full force of the city's power, the currents from every building, every wire, every outlet. It surged through him like a storm. He could feel it crackling, burning, blinding. The hunter didn't stand a chance. With a final scream, the hunter was engulfed by the surge of energy, his body convulsing as the electrical current overwhelmed him. His rod sparked, crackled, and finally exploded into a burst of blinding light, sending him flying into the air. When the energy cleared, Lucas stood alone. Zara was on the ground, struggling to catch her breath, her wind abilities completely drained. Lucas didn't look at her. He didn't trust her anymore. "I told you I wasn't your enemy," Zara said, her voice weak, but sincere. "Then why were you helping him?" Lucas's voice was sharp, cutting through the air like the crack of a whip. Zara winced, but her expression softened. "I was trying to protect you, Lucas. The Order. They've been hunting you for months. And they don't stop. They don't let go. I was trying to gather intel. To find out what they wanted with you." "Intel?" Lucas sneered, stepping back. "You've been working with them this whole time." She shook her head, her eyes pleading. "Not anymore. I had no choice." Lucas stared at her for a long moment, the raw anger still bubbling beneath his skin. He had no answers. No clear direction, but one thing was certain: the hunt wasn't over. The rain had started again, falling in soft sheets that blurred the skyline. The air smelled like wet concrete and ozone, the remnants of the battle still hanging in the streets. Lucas stood over the still body of the hunter, his chest heaving with exhaustion. He could still feel the electric hum in his bones, the surge of power that had almost consumed him, but it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Zara remained on the ground, her eyes closed, breathing in shallow gasps as she tried to recover. Her wind abilities had been completely drained, leaving her vulnerable, her pride shattered. Lucas didn't move to help her. He just stood there, feeling the weight of everything that had happened, and everything that was about to happen. "I told you," Zara said softly, her voice ragged. "I didn't want this. I didn't want you to get hurt." Lucas didn't respond right away. He stared down at the motionless hunter, his mind racing. The Order. What did they want with him? What did they want with anyone like him? Why go to all this trouble, risking everything just to extract powers from people like him? The questions twisted in his mind like a knife. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and steady. "Then why didn't you warn me? Why didn't you tell me you were working for them?" Zara slowly pulled herself to her knees, wincing with the effort. Her wind powers weren't exactly gone, just temporarily drained, but she was too exhausted to summon any of it now. She met his eyes, and for the first time, there was no deflection, no bravado. Just the raw truth: "I couldn't. I didn't know who to trust. They were going to kill me if I didn't cooperate. They were going to kill you, too, Lucas. I tried to get close, tried to find out what they were really after. But now I see how far they'll go to get what they want." "And what is it they want?" Lucas demanded, his voice growing colder. She hesitated, then finally spoke. "Your powers. All of it. Every single element they can extract. They've been trying to figure out how to control it. To turn it into weapons. Superweapons. They've been experimenting on other elementals, trying to figure out how to merge powers. To create some kind of ultimate soldier." Lucas's heart skipped a beat. Superweapons? That was what they were after all along? Not just to harvest his abilities, but to create an army of controlled, weaponized elementals. He clenched his fists, the anger bubbling up again. He had no idea the stakes were this high, no idea the kind of threat the Order represented. And now, he was part of it. He was their target. But something else was rising in him now, too. Something he hadn't felt before. It was no longer just about survival. It was about stopping them. All of them. The hum of electricity in the air was almost deafening now, and Lucas could feel the full extent of his abilities pulsing beneath his skin. He could feel the network of the city's power grid, could hear it, feel its rhythm as if it were part of him. He closed his eyes, steadying himself. If he was going to end this, if he was going to stop the Order from turning his abilities into weapons, he needed to act. "You've been playing both sides," Lucas said, his voice quiet but cutting. "And I'm supposed to just believe you now?" Zara didn't flinch. "You don't have to believe me, Lucas. I don't expect you to. But you can't do this alone. The Order isn't just after you, they're after anyone like us. And they won't stop until they have all of us." Lucas didn't respond. His mind was already calculating his next move. He knew the city like the back of his hand, but this was bigger than anything he'd ever faced. He had no idea how deep the Order's network ran, or how many others were out there, like him, running from them. But one thing was clear, he couldn't do it alone. He looked down at Zara. She was still weak, still recovering, but there was something in her eyes, something raw and genuine. For all her faults, she wasn't lying now. "You think they'll stop with just me?" he asked, his voice low. Zara's eyes softened. "No. They'll keep coming for you. Keep coming for all of us. But there's a way to stop them. We just have to get to the heart of it all." Lucas knelt beside her, his thoughts racing. He couldn't trust her fully, not after everything that had happened, but he didn't have a choice. "Not anymore. We need to find their headquarters," Lucas said finally, his voice grim. "Find out who's pulling the strings, and shut them down. Once and for all." Zara nodded, her expression hardening with resolve. "It's not going to be easy. The Order has eyes everywhere. They know more about us than we know about them. I don't care." Lucas stood, offering her a hand. "We end this now." Zara took his hand, though she still looked unsure. "What's your plan?" "First, we find out where they're keeping the others. Then we tear their operation apart, one piece at a time. But we need information, Zara. You said they've been experimenting on other elementals, right?" "Yeah. They've got a facility up north somewhere in the mountains. It's where they've been holding the captured elementals. I don't know the exact location, but I can help find it. I've been keeping track of their movements." "Good. Let's go." They both moved quickly, slipping into the shadows, disappearing into the maze of streets. The city was alive with noise, with the buzz of late-night traffic, the hum of distant sirens. It felt like the world was holding its breath, waiting for something to break. Lucas led the way, his mind sharp with focus, his senses heightened. He wasn't just running anymore. He was hunting. He had a target now, and that target was the Order. He could feel the storm building inside him, could feel the electricity humming in the air as he moved through the city. They were going to pay. It wasn't long before they reached the outskirts of the city, where the streets became quieter, the buildings more dilapidated. The further they went, the more Lucas could feel the weight of the danger closing in on them. But he wasn't afraid. He wasn't running anymore. They stopped outside an abandoned warehouse, the kind of place that reeked of desperation. The entrance was dark, but Lucas could feel the presence of something inside, a disturbance in the air. He wasn't alone. He looked at Zara. "Stay close. We move fast." Zara nodded, her eyes sharp, her posture tense. She wasn't sure what was waiting for them inside, but she knew one thing for sure: things were about to get a lot worse. They crept inside, moving past old crates and rusted machinery. The interior of the warehouse was dimly lit, the shadows stretching long across the floor. Lucas could feel the tension in the air, the way everything seemed to be holding its breath. Then he saw it. A figure in the corner of the room, standing motionless, eyes gleaming in the darkness. The figure stepped forward, revealing itself to be a tall man, dressed in tactical gear, his face hidden beneath a mask. He raised a hand, and the room seemed to grow colder. "You've come for me, Lucas." The voice was smooth, detached. But there was something else in it, a cold, knowing malice. Lucas's heart skipped a beat. You, Lucas said, his voice a low growl. You're the one behind all of this. The man didn't respond. He just raised his hand and snapped his fingers. At that signal, the room exploded with light, and Lucas felt the sudden rush of electricity surge toward him, as though the very walls were closing in. A trap. A goddamn trap. Zara's scream echoed through the warehouse, but it was drowned out by the deafening sound of static. Lucas fought to control the energy, to break free. The man's power was unlike anything he'd felt before. This wasn't just a manipulator. This was someone who had figured out how to harness and control elemental abilities. You're too late, Lucas, the man said, his voice chillingly calm. The Order already has what it needs. And with that, the world around Lucas went dark.